Hi Kevin, welcome to today's session on skin anatomy. I'm Laksh and I'm excited to guide you through this fascinating topic. Okay, before we begin, how are you doing today? That's great to hear. I'm doing well too, thanks. Now, imagine stepping onto a sunlit beach. Your skin, the boundary between you and the world, absorbs every sensation: the warmth of the sun, the chill of the breeze, the grit of the sand. It's more than a barrier, it's a sentinel, a communicator, and a protector. By the end of the session, you'll understand how the skin works, its layers, their roles, and why it's so essential. Let's get started. So here's what we're going to be covering today. The three main layers of the skin: the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis, as well as the functions of the skin, such as protection and temperature regulation. Does that sound good? Alright, let's begin with a question to get you thinking. Now, what do you think our skin actually is, and what might it be made of? That's a really interesting answer, a great start to thinking about an incredible organ. Let's dive in and cover more about the skin and its incredible roles. Okay, so our skin is absolutely amazing. It's a composite organ made up of 4 tissue types: epithelial tissue, connective, muscle, as well as nervous tissue. And it's huge. It covers about 1.5 to 2 meters squared of area and makes up 16% of our total body weight. Now here's a fun little question. Why do you think humans evolved to sweat? Yeah, exactly. Sweating is essential for regulating our body temperature, helps us keep cool, especially when we're in the heat or under stress. So now that we know about the layers and a key function, let's talk about the skin's other functions. It's not just about covering our body, the skin. It protects, it shields us from abrasion, UV, and infection. It excretes, removing salts, water, and wastes. It produces, generating melanin, keratin, and vitamin D3. It thermoregulates, controlling body temperature through sweating, as we discussed, and insulation. It stores, storing energy as fats and lipids. And it detects, censoring touch, temperature, and pain. Now here's an easy way to remember these 6 functions. PE, PTSD. For me, it's pretty memorable because honestly, I wasn't that big of a fan of PE in school. It wasn't exactly my favorite subject. Hopefully it's as memorable for you as it is for me. Now, does that make sense so far? So PE, protect, excrete, and then PTSD, produce, thermoregulate, store, and detect. How's that? Okay, let's move forward then. So now let's take it slow and break down the 3 layers of the skin step by step. First, we'll talk about the epidermis. The epidermis is the outermost layer of the skin. It's made up of stratified squamous epithelium, meaning the cells are arranged in multiple protective layers. Most of these cells are keratinocytes, which produce keratin, a protein that makes the skin tough and waterproof. Now, the epidermis doesn't have blood vessels, so it's called avascular, no blood circulation. Instead, it gets its nutrients from the dermis, which is below it. This makes the epidermis an excellent barrier, but limits ability to repair deep damage. Now, question, why do you think it's useful for the epidermis to be avascular? I don't expect you to know the answer, but if you do, amazing. Yeah, not quite. The thing is, being avascular helps protect the body from infection because there's no direct blood flow for pathogens to enter. Because as you can see, the epidermis is the first layer of contact for any germs, and if there was a blood supply, germs would be able to enter and get into your bloodstream and then to the rest of your body. Yeah, so being avascular helps protect that and prevent that. It also prioritizes its barrier role over metabolic needs. So yeah, next let's talk about the dermis. It's the middle layer sitting just beneath the epidermis. It's strong and flexible because of proteins like collagen, and it contains blood vessels that nourish the epidermis above it. It's also where things like sweat glands and hair follicles live. Right at the bottom, we have the hypodermis. This is the deepest layer, also known as the subcutaneous layer. It's mostly made up of fat, which helps keep us warm and store energy for the body. Quick tip, cutis is Latin for skin. So cutaneous kind of means skin, subcutaneous means below the skin. It's important to note that the epidermis and dermis are the layers of the skin. Hypodermis is not part of the skin, but it's below it, and it's a supportive role. Okay. Now that we've talked about the layers of the skin, let's take a closer look at this diagram to see how they've been arranged in the human body. So at the very top we have the epidermis, which forms the outermost layer. Notice how it doesn't have any blood vessels. Again, it's avascular, that's why it relies on the dermis below it for nutrients. Next we have the dermis, which is split into two layers, the papillary layer right here, and the reticular layer below it. The papillary layer is closer to the surface. It contains blood vessels and nerves to nourish the epidermis and provide sensation. The reticular layer is thicker and has dense fibers like collagen and elastin, giving the skin its strength and elasticity. Collagen for strength and elastin, you guessed it, elasticity. Finally, at the bottom, we have the hypodermis, also called the subcutaneous layer. You can see how it has this yellowish looking tissue right here. It's called adipose tissue. Note that term, adipose. This layer stores energy, providing insulation and cushions the body from impacts. Now take a moment to notice how these layers work together. For example, the blood vessels in the dermis right here are close enough to help the epidermis while also connecting to the fat cells in the hypodermis. So there's a two-way function supporting both the layers above and the layers below. Now, do you have any questions about how these layers function or connect? All right, let's move on then. So going into more detail now for each layer in the epidermis. At the bottom, we have what's called the stratum basale. This contains columnar regenerative cells that divide to replenish the layers above. This is anchored to the dermis via these things called hemidesmosomes. These act like a glue holding the epidermis to the dermis. Above that, we have the stratum spinosum, known as the prickly layer. It contains desmosomes, which are like bridges linking neighboring cells, giving strength and flexibility. So here we have hemidesmosomes, and then in the middle-ish layers, we have desmosomes. Next, we have the stratum granulosum. This contains granules that help cells dehydrate and form this waxy material that creates a waterproof barrier. And then above that, we have the stratum corneum, a cornified layer. This just means that the cells are dead and flat, and this helps protect the skin and shed regularly. Now, importantly, your immune cells, specifically dendritic cells, are found in the stratum spinosum, so this layer here. Now, these cells play a key role in identifying and responding to pathogens, helping protect the skin from infections. Now, the cells in the epidermis, as we discussed, are held together by these things called desmosomes, which act like strong anchors between the neighboring cells, kind of like rivets. Now, at the base of the epidermis, we have hemidesmosomes, connecting the basal layer to the dermis below. This structural reinforcement ensures that the skin remains intact even under mechanical stress, like when you rub your hands together. The layers don't just come off because of these supporting structures, hemidesmosomes and desmosomes. Okay, now this slide introduces the four main types of tissue: epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. The epidermis belongs to the epithelial tissue group, which makes sense because epithelial is great at covering and protecting surfaces, just like skin does. See right here, it says covering exposed surfaces, lining internal passageways and chambers, and forming secretory glands, like our sweat glands. Now, you don't need to memorize everything in each of these boxes, just have a general idea of the properties of each tissue, especially epithelial tissue, and how that links to our skin. For example, our skin is tough, it regenerates quickly, and acts as a barrier. Now let's get more specific. So far we know that the epidermis is made up of epithelial tissue, but what type of epithelial tissue? Now the epidermis is predominantly made up of stratified squamous epithelium, as shown here. The name of epithelial tissue is based on two important things. One is the number of layers, and two is the shape of the cells. So the number and the shape. Now, the number of layers is two types. You can either call it simple, single, so one layer. That's called simple. Or you can have multiple layers, which are stacked, and they're called stratified. So you have these two terms, simple and stratified. One, multiple. Okay. And then two, you have the shape of the cells. You can either have squamous, which means flat and thin. Think about like squamish. This is really good for protection. And then you have cuboidal, which means like cube-shaped, like a box, often found in glands. And then you have columnar, which means tall and rectangular like a column. This is great for absorption and secretion, such as in the intestines. Now in the epidermis, we have the stratified squamous epithelium, and it works perfectly because it's stacked, flattened cells that create a strong protective barrier. Now, a cool question, why do you think the skin needs multiple layers rather than just like one simple squamous layer? Why have all these multiple stacked layers? Yeah, exactly. The multiple layers of cells ensure that even if the outermost cells here are damaged or lost, the underlying layers can continue to protect the body. Really good. Okay, let's move forward now. Now it's important to note that not all skin is the same. In areas like the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet, the skin is thicker due to an extra layer in the epidermis. This is called the stratum lucidum layer. It's kind of darkly shaped here, colored here. So thin skin covers most of the body and contains hair, whilst thick skin is only found in your palms and hands of your soles of your feet. Thick skin has no hair and includes an additional layer in the epidermis called the stratum lucidum, like we discussed, which adds extra strength and protection in areas that experience friction. That's why your hands have thick skin, as well as your feet. You walk with your feet, you grapple with your hands. Those layers need to be tough, and that's why you have your stratum lucidum. So notice how your thick skin has a much larger epidermal layer compared to thin skin. This is both due to the stratum lucidum, but as well as having thicker other layers. This makes it more durable. Now, another important feature is thick skin is hairless, like I mentioned, but it also contains more sweat glands. Now, why do you think this is the case? Why do you think thick skin lacks hair but has more sweat glands? Yeah, it's because thick skin is meant to handle a lot of friction, like your palms and soles. Hair would just get damaged during all that abrasion and could actually weaken the surface strength, while more sweat glands help with temperature regulation and provide protection from friction. So your pores, your sweat pores, they release fluids. Yeah, and that provides protection from abrasion. Yeah, temperature regulation. Okay, let's move forward now. Now this slide highlights the close relationship between the epidermis and the dermis. You can see here these features called epidermal ridges and dermal papillae. Epidermal ridges are these downward pointing projections, whilst dermal papillae are upward pointing projections, and they kind of fit together like puzzle pieces interlocking. This structure serves two key purposes. One, all this interlocking, it increases the surface area, and two, this helps with strengthening the layers and holding them together. This ensures that they don't just easily come apart and make sure that the skin is durable and resilient. So you can see how they fit together. Now underneath the epidermis, we find the dermis and the subcutaneous layer, the hypodermis as we discussed, each with very important roles. We're going to take a good look at the dermis, which is right below the epidermis. It's what gives our skin its strength and flexibility. It's made up of two layers, the papillary layer above and the reticular layer below. The papillary layer at the top is full of blood vessels that feed the epidermis and sensory nerves that let us feel things like touch and temperature. Below that is the reticular layer. It's packed with collagen fibers for strength and elastic fibers that let our skin stretch and bounce back. In the close-up right here, you can see how these fibers create a strong, stretchy framework for our skin. The dermis is also where we find important structures like blood vessels, lymph vessels, and nerves, all working together to keep our skin healthy and functional. Now we're going to talk about blood flow in the skin and how it's organized. Blood is essential for keeping our skin healthy, providing oxygen, nutrients, and removing waste. But as we discussed, it has no blood supply of its own. This is where the plexuses in the dermis come in. A plexus is like a network of blood vessels, and in the skin, these networks ensure every layer gets the support that they need. There are two main types of plexuses shown here. You have the cutaneous plexus down here. This is found at the boundary between the dermis and the hypodermis. It supplies blood to deeper structures like sweat glands and hair follicles, as well as the lower dermis as a whole. And then above that, you have the subpapillary plexus. This is closer to the surface, just under the papillary layer of the dermis. Subpapillary, right below the papillary layer. Remember that. Now, it helps deliver oxygen and nutrients to the upper dermis, so the upper section of the dermis, and supports the epidermis above. Okay. Now, in the diagram, you can see how these plexuses work together. The cutaneous plexus forms the base, while the subpapillary plexus branches upward to nourish the higher layers. These networks are critical because without them, the skin couldn't function or repair itself properly. Now, the deepest layer of the skin is called the hypodermis, which is primarily composed of adipose tissue. This layer acts as an insulator to regulate body temperature, a shock absorber to protect deeper tissue, as well as a storage site for energy. You can see all those adipocytes in this close-up. It's the layer that helps cushion your body from impacts. So we've covered the three main layers of the skin, the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis, each playing a unique role in protection, support, and energy storage. Now we're going to do a quick recap of each of these three layers to make sure you really understand. So within the epidermis, we've explored its 5 layers, starting at the bottom with the stratum basale, where new cells are born, up to the stratum corneum, the tough outermost layer of dead cells. And then you have the dermis, located beneath the epidermis. This provides strength, elasticity, and nourishment to the skin through its papillary and reticular layers, supported by blood vessels and sensory structures. And then we have the hypodermis, the deepest skin layer. It's composed of adipose tissue that provides insulation, energy storage, and cushioning to protect underlying structures. Alright, now let's test your understanding for today's lesson. For each question, I want you to take a moment to write down your answer first before sharing it with me. This will help you think more deeply about what we've covered. You ready, Kev? Okay, let's start. So the outermost layer of the skin is called blank. Yeah, it's called the epidermis. Epi meaning topmost, dermis meaning skin. Epidermis. Blank anchors the epidermis to the dermis. Not quite, close. It's actually the hemidesmosomes. Yeah, not the desmosomes. You can't get those two mixed up. The 2 layers of the dermis are papillary, yep. Yeah, great. Reticular, papillary and reticular. And then which type of cell dominates the hypodermis? Exactly, adipocytes. Mentioned those quite a lot. Okay. Alright, for your homework now, Kevin, you'll be applying some of the stuff we've learned today. This task will help you visualize how the skin is structured and how each layer contributes to its overall function. Now, don't stress about making it all perfect. Focus on showing what you've understood so far. So draw and label a diagram of the skin. Include the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis. Include where accessory structures are, like sweat glands and hair follicles. And then draw the 2 blood supply regions. Make sure you have clear labels and straight ruled lines. It's just good general practice for biology. Have a nice clear title. And then you don't need to go into great detail, just a nice sketch. And then write 1 function for each layer. Okay? Alright, that wraps up today's lesson. You've done an amazing job, and I'm really proud of the effort you put in. Take your time with the homework, and remember, it's all about understanding, not perfection. Have a great day, and I can't wait to see your diagram next time. Take care.